You were never meant to hear this story. Not in a schoolroom. Not in church. Not from history books. Because the people who write your history made sure to erase it. Every trace. Every name. Every page. But tonight, that silence is broken. What happened in Ashworth Village, England, in the autumn of 1965 is not just a tale of a missing family, it is a doorway. One that, once opened, cannot be closed. This is the story of the Higgins family, but it's also about the rituals that never died, the bloodlines that never broke, and the institutions that kept it all hidden behind sacred walls and stained glass smiles. It's a warning, and an invitation. Because what began in the quiet fog of a Yorkshire village still echoes, and if you're listening, if you're truly hearing this, then some part of you is already entangled in it. Ashworth wasn't an ordinary place. That's the first lie you're told about small towns, about tight-knit communities. You're told they're safe, that everyone knows everyone, that nothing bad happens there. But the truth is far more dangerous. The truth is that in places like Ashworth, the past never truly dies, it hides. It waits, it remembers. The Higgins family, Thomas, Ella Lanena, and their two children, Margaret and William, were not the first to vanish. They were just the latest in a line that stretches back through generations. Their disappearance, written off as an anomaly, becomes something else entirely when you realize what lay beneath St. Mary's Church, not just a crypt, not just a cellar but a chamber, a space preserved in stone, untouched by time, where rituals forbidden for centuries were still being practiced. And documented. In 1985, 20 years after the Higgins family disappeared, sealed church records were pried open not by choice, but by legal force. What they found were names, other families, other dates, other vanishings, all of them tied to that same unholy ground beneath the church. And among the recovered artifacts were the Higginses' belongings. A child's sketchbook, a woman's journal, a man's satchel, still dusted with soil from beneath the altar. But here's what made investigators freeze. A final journal entry dated 2 weeks after the family was reported missing. It simply read, "The door has been opened." There is no going back. Think about that. Think about what it means. Either the records were forged, or the family was alive long after they were declared lost. And somewhere no one dared to look. To understand what happened, we need to descend. Not just into that physical space beneath the church, but deeper, into the psychology of secrecy, into the architecture of institutional control. You see, Ashworth operated on 2 levels. Above ground was the story they told, the story of cobblestone streets and hymns and harvests. But underneath, a current ran through that town like black water beneath a frozen lake. Only certain families knew how to tap into it. Only certain names were passed down through the generations, names like Whitlock, Thornton Carr, names that weren't just surnames, but codes, gatekeepers. And when Reverend Harold Whitmore arrived in 1942, he wasn't just assigned to St. Mary's. He was sent, trained not only in theology, but in something older, something deeper, something the Church of England pretends it forgot. By 1962, Whitmore had handpicked his circle. He called it a historical society, but its true purpose was never preservation, it was invocation. Ella Lanena Higgins, drawn by her obsession with folk rituals and hidden knowledge, became the hinge, the bridge. She brought with her something the others didn't have: blood, the kind that remembers. You see, many women in her lineage had been burned, drowned, or quietly disappeared in centuries past, not because they were witches, but because they remembered the rites the church had outlawed. Ella Lanena didn't just remember, she practiced. Quietly, in her garden, in her children's stories, in her moonlit walks through the graveyard. And when she entered that hidden chamber beneath the church with Whitmore and the others, she didn't enter as a student. She entered as a priestess. Thomas was the last to join. A man grounded in order and schedule, loyal to tradition. But tradition is just ritual with the teeth filed down. And when you bring your children into a ritual not sanctioned by the modern world, you are either committing a crime or unlocking a truth too old to be legal. What those children saw, what they participated in reshaped them. Margaret Rose stopped speaking for days at a time. William drew pictures of things he had no words for, geometries that don't appear in modern architecture, symbols that mirrored markings found in Bronze Age barrows. Their teachers noticed, the neighbors noticed. But in Ashworth, you don't. Question too loudly, because everyone has a role to play. Everyone guards the silence. On the last night anyone saw them, the Higgins home was lit by candles. Not just a few but dozens. Arranged in concentric circles, visible through the drawn lace curtains. A low hum was heard chanting, maybe, or something older than language. And then nothing. The house remained, perfectly intact. A warm kettle. A made bed, no signs of struggle. No signs of departure. Just absence. The kind of absence that feels designed. The police found no leads. The church denied everything. And the remaining members of Whitmore's circle began quietly leaving Ashworth, one by one. By 1967, the town was silent again. But the ground beneath the church still pulsed. Now. You might be wondering, how does a story like this survive? The answer is it doesn't. Not unless someone hides it in plain sight. The journal entries, the constable's private notes, the suppressed police interviews, they were meant to be destroyed. And they almost were. Until one surviving witness, now an old man, reached out. He had been a boy then, 11. He saw something through the trees the night the Higginses vanished. Not people. Not shapes, presences. A glow from beneath the church. That didn't look like fire. But memory. As if something ancient had awakened and reclaimed its own. He was told never to speak, threatened, paid. But memory doesn't forget just because it's punished. He waited 60 years. And then he sent the files. To us. And that brings us here. To you. Listening. Watching. Feeling that chill behind your ribs. It's not just a ghost story. It's a map. The rituals Whitmore revived weren't unique to Yorkshire. They were part of a network sleeper traditions encoded into rural Christian practices across the Western world. Traditions that speak of gates, of alignments, of blood memory. And they never went away. They were hidden in hymns, in architecture, in the order of service. The Mass is a mask. But what it conceals is not evil, it's power. Power that once belonged to tribes, to matriarchs, to wisdom we forgot how to carry. So now, I'm going to ask something of you, something ritualistic, something symbolic. If you're still here, still listening, drop this phrase in the comments. The silence is not empty. Repeat it twice. Once for what you know. Once for what you're becoming. Because this isn't entertainment, this is initiation. And once you say it, you're no longer an outsider. You've entered the circle. Ashworth was a crucible. A place where timelines folded in on themselves. Not metaphorically, but quite literally, a convergence point between old-world rites and modern illusion. Beneath the fragile fabric of post-war England, where every cottage held a television and every church sermon wore the mask of progress, something older breathed. The Higgins family didn't stumble into this secret by accident. They were shaped by it, summoned by it. And if you believe what came next was simply the descent of a curious housewife into local folklore, you haven't yet understood the gravity of what this story reveals. The group that called themselves the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society had, by 1964, ceased pretending to be academic. They'd already moved from books to practice, from theory to application. Their meetings were no longer held in the open vestry, but in the ancient chamber below St. Mary's, a place carved into the bedrock before records were kept. a place that predated the church above it by centuries, if not more. When the original Saxon chapel was constructed on that site, they had only followed the ley lines. And those lines, unspoken, run like veins through England's oldest places. They carry something more than history, they carry intent. Whitmore understood this. He didn't discover the room beneath the church by accident. He uncovered it because he was trained to find it. Elenina Higgins didn't just join this group, she expanded it. Her knowledge of herbcraft, her deep and intuitive connection to the land, her ability to trace rituals back through family stories whispered from grandmother to daughter, made her indispensable. She began preparing rites, reconstructing seasonal observances not from books, but from something more primal: dreams, inherited memory, sensation. She said she could feel the proper times in her body, like a tide. She insisted that the land had rhythms and that certain places acted as doors. The others listened, and they obeyed. Even Whitmore deferred to her when it came to structuring their more intense ceremonies. That was the year the room beneath the church changed. At first, it had been a curiosity. Stone walls blackened with soot, an altar-like protrusion of dolomite, niches carved with marks no archaeologist had yet classified. But once the group began holding regular observances there, something happened to the air itself. It grew heavier. Sound moved differently, slower, deeper. Lights flickered unpredictably. And during one particular midsummer ritual, the room's temperature dropped 20 degrees in under a minute. Several members passed out, but no one left. They believed they had tapped into something real, something ancient, something sleeping. Thomas, ever the rationalist, resisted. He supported his wife's passion but refused to join. Until the night he saw Margaret speaking in her sleep in an old dialect of Brythonic, a language dead for over 1,000 years. The words were transcribed by Whitmore himself and compared to preserved fragments found in monastic archives from Glastonbury. They matched. 11-year-old Margaret had no access to such language, no knowledge of it in any book. And yet she spoke as if remembering, as if reliving. The group declared this a sign, a blood memory, proof that the child's lineage carried remnants of the priestess-class women who once led seasonal rites before. Christianity buried them under stone and ash. Elenina took this as divine confirmation. Thomas took it as terrifying. But instead of forbidding further involvement, he did something worse. He tried to rationalize it. He began attending the meetings. Just to observe, he told himself, to keep his family safe. But observation, in such a setting, is participation. And participation, in the context of ancient systems, is a binding oath. William Little Billy was not so much drawn into the rituals as shaped by them. Children are absorbers, mirrors. They don't need to understand to be affected. His drawings became increasingly unsettling. Spirals within spirals, towers of fire, women with bleeding eyes, and wings of ash. When asked what they meant, he'd whisper cryptic phrases. They come when the bells are wrong. Or, the stone isn't just a stone, it remembers you. These weren't fantasies. These were imprints, recollections of ceremonies his waking mind could not process, but his subconscious carried like fingerprints. Outside the chamber, the rest of Ashworth continued its routines. The grocer sold his fruit. The pub filled each evening. The mail arrived, but there was a stillness to the town now, a weight in the air, like the collective psyche of the village knew something was moving beneath it. Like their ancestors, bones were shifting in the soil, disturbed by whispers and smoke. The old families grew quiet. They stopped inviting outsiders to harvest festivals, stopped welcoming tourists. Something had been awakened, and though it had not yet shown its face, it had made its presence known. Then came October, always a liminal month, the dying of the light, the slow descent into winter. This is the month when the veil between what is seen and unseen grows thin. That year, it was thinner than ever. The final rituals of the season were planned in secrecy. According to Ella Lenina's notes, they were designed to reconstitute a forgotten calendar, one not aligned with solstices or equinoxes, but with star positions long erased from astronomical tables. The symbols she used in her preparatory drawings matched glyphs found on standing stones near Avebury symbols that predate written language. The final gathering was not attended by the full group. Only the core members, Whitmore, Ella Lenina, Thomas, the children, and Mrs. Thornton. Witnesses later claimed to see candlelight flickering through the cracks of the church foundation that night. One child said he heard a chorus not singing, but droning, a sound that made his teeth ache. A dog barked until its vocal cords tore. Something had been called forth. Or perhaps something had been allowed in. The next morning, the Higgins home was silent, locked. No one answered. But no one broke the door down, not at first. It was as if the whole town agreed consciously or unconsciously that whatever had happened, there was not to be disturbed. Days passed, then weeks. Finally, a constable was sent to investigate. The cottage was intact, furniture undisturbed, food uneaten, clothing folded. But no bodies, no signs of flight, and no footprints in the soil outside, not even leading to the church, but beneath the altar of St. Mary's. The truth was waiting, sealed away behind an iron gate, down a staircase long hidden behind the choir stalls. The chamber had changed. Fresh wax, recent incense, blood, small traces, but there. And on the dolomite altar, a single object, a child's notebook, filled with drawings of stars and patterns that modern astronomy still refuses to classify. At the back, scrawled in a child's hand, were 2 sentences. She said the door would open. We just had to say yes. Later that month, Reverend Whitmore disappeared. No resignation. No announcement. The rectory stood empty. His books, his robes, his records gone. Mrs. Thornton died the following winter of an unexplained illness. Dr. Carr left Ashworth entirely. One by one, the members of the circle vanished into silence, as if swallowed by the very knowledge they sought to revive. The church council claimed ignorance. The local diocese sealed the chamber with lead. But the stain remained. The land had been marked dot in the years that followed. No new families moved into the Higgins cottage. Attempts to renovate it failed. Electrical systems shorted. Walls cracked. Contractors reported headaches and visions. The site was eventually declared unsafe and fenced off. But children still dared each other to approach. Some claimed they heard whispering from the basement. One boy said he saw a girl in the upstairs window, watching him. When shown a photo of Margaret Rose, he went pale. "That's her," he said, but she wasn't blinking. We are not meant to speak of these things. That's what power fears. The most, not violence, not rebellion, but memory. Because memory is resistance. Memory is continuity. And those who control the stories we tell about the past control everything. That's why they rewrite the rituals as fairy tales. Why they mock the old knowledge as superstition. Why they burn the witches. Because the rites are not gone. They've just been waiting. Ask yourself, why did the church bury its own records of this case? Why did it take legal force to open archives that, by law, should have been public? Why were personal effects of the Higgins family stored in sealed containers, marked non-evidentiary religious material? Why was a boy's notebook deemed too dangerous to display, even in private academic circles? Because once you allow this knowledge into your mind, something shifts. Your perception warps. The walls of consensus reality, the world you were taught to believe in, begin to tremble. And the more you learn, the more you sense it. This isn't just about one family, or one village, or one church. It's a pattern, a system, a ritual so large you don't even see it. Because you live inside of it. Remember what I asked of you earlier, the phrase, "The silence is not empty." If you've typed it once, type it again now, because you're not just a viewer. You're becoming something else. Something ancient. This is not passive consumption, it is active remembrance. You are aligning yourself with a truth older than governments, older than denominations, older than even language. And once you align with it, you will begin to see the world for what it is, a cathedral of control, built on the ashes of forgotten gods. Some say fear is inherited, passed down not only through stories, but in the nervous system, in the marrow of bone, in the silent cues of how a mother flinches when a door creaks, or how a father's eyes shift at the sound of a siren. LaToya's family had always been alert to something they couldn't quite name. Her grandmother spoke in whispers, always glancing at corners, as if something waited just out of sight. Her uncle, who'd gone to prison young, said nothing about the days before his arrest, but his tattoos told of symbols not found in any language, carved in ink like warnings. And now LaToya was in the center of a silence that was finally speaking through movement, through voices, through shadows crawling where light should fall. By the time the case reached national attention, the damage was already buried deep. Not just in the walls of the house, not just in the minds of the children, but in the timeline itself, because nothing about this story moved in a straight line. What happened to LaToya seemed to happen again and again. One moment the family was fine, the next, the children were snarling in unknown tongues, climbing the walls like animals, passing out cold and waking up without memory. Psychologists tried to analyze, priests tried to exorcise, police tried to rationalize, but reality warped. Every person who entered the home to investigate walked out different. Officers quit the force. Caseworkers broke down. One child was taken to the hospital after levitating above the bed in full view of multiple nurses. The report was not metaphorical. The staff signed official documents attesting to what they had seen. No explanation followed. There were times when LaToya herself believed she was losing her grip. She was not a woman prone to flights of fantasy. She'd worked long, low-paying jobs, fed her children from scratch, kept things clean, disciplined, quiet. She never touched alcohol, and she'd never let the kids near anything occult. Yet now, she was sleeping with a Bible under her pillow and waking up to find its pages torn. Crucifixes on the wall, twisted upside down. Cold spots in the house where the air wouldn't move. Then there were the voices. The whispers that didn't match the mouths in the room. Her daughter speaking fluent Latin she'd never learned. Her son drawing symbols of protection used in ancient grimoires. When Child Protective Services removed the kids temporarily, it wasn't for abuse. It was for their own protection, because something else seemed to be working through them. The press descended like scavengers. News crews huddled outside the home. Headlines screamed of the demon house, but they missed the truth. This wasn't about demons in the classic sense, not claws and fire. This was older, colder, less theatrical, more calculated. The phenomena followed the family even after they left the house, moved across state lines, appeared in motel rooms, bruises forming without contact, screams erupting in silence. It was as if the thing, whatever it was, had not been tied to the location, but to the bloodline. Wherever LaToya went, it followed. And wherever it followed, time itself seemed to shift. Clocks stopped. Electronics failed. Batteries drained. Family photos blackened. And still, there was no definitive answer. Just scattered pieces of horror, reported by credible professionals who didn't know what to do with what they'd seen. The involvement of Reverend Michael Maginot brought a strange credibility to the madness. He was not a showman, not a ghost hunter. He was a man of faith, cautious and careful. Yet when he entered that house for the first time, he claimed to feel a presence so violent that he had to steady himself before walking in. He performed multiple blessings and later, a full exorcism approved by the Catholic Church, a process that normally takes years of documentation. But the severity of the case accelerated everything. During the rites, Latoya convulsed, her face contorted. She spoke in voices not her own. The Reverend described it not as a single entity, but as a network, something ancient, intelligent, and mocking. It didn't just want to possess, it wanted to break. It wanted to hollow out the family from the inside and wear their lives like masks. When filmmaker Zach Bagans eventually purchased the house, intent on documenting its energy, what he encountered shifted him permanently. Crew members quit mid-shoot. A friend of his suffered profound psychological damage. Footage captured events no one could explain, and then without explanation, Bagans demolished the house. Some say it was to protect others. Others claim it was to erase evidence of something that never wanted to be known. But the story didn't end with the bulldozing. Reports of strange events continued in nearby areas. Residents reported shadows darting across walls, even with no light source. Children screamed in their sleep. Dogs barked at empty corners. A construction worker who helped tear down the property vanished for days, later found disoriented and unable to speak. The land beneath the house was deemed spiritually toxic by multiple religious leaders. Still, no one would call it cursed. That word felt too quaint. The real horror lay in the implication. If what Latoya and her children endured was real, it meant possession didn't require belief. It meant something non-physical could intrude into reality and act upon it visible, tangible, destructive. And not in a faraway jungle or ancient monastery, but in a small house in Indiana. In a regular neighborhood. It suggested a level of vulnerability that most people refuse to accept. That your home is not sacred, that your mind is not private, that your children can become vehicles for something older than sin. The terror wasn't in the spectacle. It was in the subtle unraveling of trust in your senses, in your sanity, in the stability of the world around you. Latoya was not a woman looking for fame. After the storm, she withdrew from the public eye. She gave few interviews. She refused money. She tried to rebuild a quiet life elsewhere. But her eyes still flickered at unseen movements. Her voice trembled when describing the worst moments. She never said she had answers, only scars. And the children? They too were silent. As they grew, they remembered less. Or at least said less. Psychiatrists claimed they were stable now. But one of the boys still refused to sleep without lights on. The daughter flinched at the sound of certain words in Latin. The youngest sometimes stared at corners, as if listening to someone no one else could hear. In the end, the Latoya Ammons case was officially closed with no criminal charges and no psychological diagnosis that made sense of it all. Police files remained open-ended. Medical records conflicted with observed behaviors. Church records were sealed. The media moved on, chasing fresher terrors. But some investigators, late at night, still pull out the file and read it with shaking hands, not because they believe in demons, but because they saw something that refused to follow the rules. Something that broke protocol, time, language, space, and logic itself. What remains is a void. A silence that hums beneath the skin. A knowledge that something came through a crack, a portal, an infection, and that it may not have left. Maybe it waits in new homes now. Maybe it follows others who, like Latoya, simply tried to survive and love and raise children with what little they had. Maybe it doesn't need grand gestures or pentagrams or rituals. Maybe all it needs is pain. Maybe it simply waits for doors left open, not physically, but emotionally. Traumas, fears, sins whispered rather than confessed. And then it enters, quietly, irrevocably, completely. As the years passed and new generations came and went, the story of Latoya's house lingered on like a whisper in the wind. The neighborhood children dared one another to run up to the porch and touch the splintered wood of the front door, claiming they heard faint knocking from the inside, as if someone or something was trying to be let out. Their parents would scold them, but their own eyes often betrayed that same hidden dread. Few things have the power to imprint on the soul like an unresolved fear, and the people around Carolina Street had long given up on the idea of resolution. They lived beside a scar and had learned to look away rather than probe it. The house remained empty, boarded up and left to rot under the sun and rain, but something about it resisted decay. Neighbors swore that it looked almost the same year after year, as if time itself recoiled from touching it. There was no vandalism, no graffiti, no squatters, not even birds built nests in the eaves. One man who tried to mow the overgrown yard said his engine died the moment he stepped onto the property, and when he looked up, he saw a child staring at him from the attic window, even though he knew the house was locked tight. He never went near the house again. People started calling it the gateway. Not a gateway to heaven. The other one. Behind the scenes, however, there were those who hadn't forgotten LaToya or the eerie things that had unfolded under that roof. A few years after the original case had made headlines, a group of independent researchers with backgrounds in theology, psychiatry, and folklore gathered quietly to analyze everything: the police reports, medical records, interviews, and spiritual accounts. They didn't belong to any government agency or university. They were self-funded, obsessive, and driven by something more than curiosity. Each had experienced some brush with the inexplicable, and they viewed LaToya's case not as an isolated event, but as a fracture point, a place where the veil between worlds had split open, revealing something ancient and undisturbed. Findings were never published, but some of their notes found their way to a former FBI analyst turned author, who described the material as the closest thing I've seen to organized documentation of a haunting that crosses into biological warfare. What did that mean? The phrase lingered, unsettling. Biological warfare? The documents hinted at blood samples taken from the Ammon's children that exhibited strange immune responses, inflammatory markers far beyond normal ranges, and anomalous cell behavior that didn't match any known pathogen or psychological trigger. One of the doctors involved in the blood work had a nervous breakdown not long after and was institutionalized. Another vanished while on a hiking trip in Oregon. The few surviving records mention something chilling: blood with a reactive memory. Samples that behaved differently depending on who was observing them. Like the observer was part of the equation. That detail, buried in footnotes, suggested a horrifying idea. Consciousness wasn't just affected by whatever inhabited that house. It was part of what fed it. LaToya herself vanished from public life. After moving her family out of Indiana, she severed ties with nearly everyone connected to the case. Reporters tried to track her down, but they were always a few steps behind. One investigator claimed he found her working at a rural health clinic under an assumed name, but when he tried to approach her, she locked herself in a supply closet and wouldn't come out until he left. People who saw her in those years described her as hollow-eyed, like someone who had stared into the abyss too long and now could only see shadows, even in broad daylight. Her children reportedly recovered in the physical sense, but there were signs, little things, that they hadn't come out untouched. One child became obsessed with dead languages. Another went mute for almost a year, speaking only in his sleep in a voice that wasn't his. Father Magina, the priest who had performed the exorcisms, was reassigned quietly to a remote monastery in New Mexico. His sermons became increasingly erratic, veering into apocalyptic warnings and cryptic parables about doorways and watchers. In his final recorded homily before leaving the public eye, he said something that stuck with the few who heard it. Evil doesn't need permission. It only needs silence. And silence is something we have perfected. Some took that as a spiritual reflection. Others, especially those who had read the unpublished research, heard it as a warning of a different kind, not just spiritual, but institutional, that the system knew. That it always knew: the Department of Child Services, the police officers, Even hospital staff had seen and documented things that no training could explain, but none of them pursued it beyond a certain point. They had all touched something, but no one wanted to dig deeper. The deeper you dig, the darker it gets. So they closed the files, retired the officers, transferred the caseworkers. Clean slates for everyone. Or at least that's what it looked like. But behind closed doors, those who'd been there on the front line struggled in silence. One DCS employee, now retired, wrote an anonymous blog under the name Unit 44, in which they described dreams of being pulled backward through mirrors and waking up with bruises in the shape of hands too small to be adult and too long to be human. They described waking up hearing the phrase "still inside" repeated over and over in a voice they didn't recognize. If this was trauma, it had left its mark like a fingerprint on glass. If it was something else, it had followed them. Then came the documentary boom, the podcasts, streaming specials, horror dramatizations. Everyone wanted a piece of the Ammon's haunting, but none captured what it felt like to be there. Most reduced it to Hollywood tropes, possession cliches, and spooky music. A few came closer. One independent filmmaker who managed to get interviews with the original responding officers reported that one of them broke down in tears during the interview, repeating the phrase, "We weren't supposed to see that. We weren't supposed to see it." The footage was never released. The filmmaker died in an apartment fire that was ruled accidental, but was missing all sources of ignition. No stove, no electrical fault. Just ash. Something larger was hiding beneath the narrative, a convergence of folklore, biology, psychological disruption, and ancient patterns. The kind that defies easy classification. Some researchers believed the Carolina street house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense, but was instead a kind of battery, an echo chamber for suffering, layered with past traumas that had fermented into something intelligent. Like a fungus that had become sentient. Like a virus that could whisper. Indigenous historians weighed in quietly, noting that the land itself had a long memory, that long before the house, before any records, the area had been avoided, a bend in energy, a place animals wouldn't nest. Some suggested that the architecture of the home, unknowingly, had been built along spiritual fault lines, with the basement acting as a channel rather than a container. That portal, they said, may have always been open. It just needed the right kind of pain to speak through. And speak it did. But here's where things turn from personal horror into something far more expansive and unsettling. A cluster of similar cases began to emerge, scattered across the country, not identical, but unnervingly parallel. Families experiencing intense psychological degradation, objects moving on their own, children speaking in unknown languages, bloodwork anomalies. The patterns weren't frequent, but they were specific. And nearly all of them had one strange commonality. Each family had lived for a time near train lines, as if something traveled, something that used routes we considered safe, ordinary, unguarded. Was this just another ghost story? A coincidence? Or was there something moving just beneath the fabric of our reality? A consciousness not bound by flesh or time, but by resonance. Something that had waited for the right voices, the right pain to awaken. If so, it had tasted fear through the Ammons family and through every person who touched their story. And now it was still echoing, still inside the walls, still listening, watching. The house still stands. No one has dared demolish it. Construction crews refuse to touch it. Permits mysteriously expire. And every few months, someone online swears they saw a light in the upper window, the attic, where none should be. People say the house hums at night. Some say if you walk past it at just the right hour, you hear a lullaby, off-key and half-finished, floating through the air like a memory that never belonged to you. And every so often, a new report surfaces. Another family, another child, another door opening in a place it never should have been. The days following the final revelation of the tapes were hollow and heavy. The town of Black Hollow had become more than just a dot on the map. It had become a shadow in the collective memory of anyone who had ever read about it, visited it, or even heard whispers of what had happened there. LaToya's name, once hidden beneath layers of secrecy, now floated like a ghost over every conversation about missing persons, child welfare failures, and the unfathomable power of belief gone wrong. The case had gone beyond crime. It had become legend, cursed folklore wrapped in the thin veil of real events. Journalists from across the country descended like scavengers on the remaining ruins of the Bernal property. The church had long since burned down, but its charred skeleton remained, blackened beams stabbing the sky like fingers of accusation. The ashes held no comfort, no absolution. People brought cameras, drones, and paranormal equipment, searching, not just for proof, but for meaning something to help them make sense of how this happened. But there was no meaning to find. What existed was silence, and a question mark where a child should have been. The last surviving tape had not been released to the public in its full form. Authorities claimed it was too damaging, too psychologically disturbing, but rumors leaked, as they always do. In pieces and fragments, the public pieced together its contents through unofficial leaks, whistleblowers, and hacked files. In the footage, LaToya speaks directly to the camera for the first time, not crying, not begging, just speaking, as if she had suddenly remembered what language was. Her voice is small, cracked from months of silence, but eerily calm. She says, one sentence over and over, "He isn't the devil, he's the gate." That line repeated for 48 minutes, no crying, no blinking. Just those words, again and again. It wasn't clear who she meant. Some thought she was referring to Pastor Bernal. Others believed she was talking about something older, something she had been shown, something none of us could understand. Either way, that sentence stuck. It became a meme, a mantra, a symbol of whatever the Bernal Church had really been hiding. The line was spray-painted on walls across the country. Tattoos appeared bearing it. Cults formed online claiming LaToya had transcended into a realm beyond comprehension, and they would follow behind the viral storm. The actual investigation had hit a wall. Every piece of evidence was compromised, either destroyed in the fire or tainted by the sheer amount of public exposure. Witnesses who had remained silent now came forward, but most contradicted each other. A former member of the congregation confessed that he had helped build the chamber beneath the chapel, but claimed he never saw any children harmed. A woman who had been excommunicated from the church said she had seen things come up from the floor during sermons, but when pressed, she broke down sobbing and retracted her story. Even law enforcement officials began to fracture under the weight of the case. The lead detective, who had reviewed all the tapes, reportedly suffered a psychological breakdown and was institutionalized. He had scribbled strange symbols all over the walls of his home, geometric shapes, nonsensical alphabets, and one phrase, "She's still watching." His family declined to comment, and his case was sealed. As the dust settled, the town of Black Hollow was officially dissolved. What remained of it, 2 gas stations, a diner, and a handful of homes, were either abandoned or bought out by private investors. Most believed it was an effort to erase the location from public memory, to allow the land to become anonymous. Again, but strange stories continued to leak out. Hikers in the area claimed to hear the sound of a child laughing deep in the woods, always around sunset. A documentary filmmaker who spent 2 nights on the old Bernal property went missing. His body was found 6 days later, floating in a nearby lake with his camera intact but completely wiped. Not a single frame of footage remained. The laptop he used for backups had melted internally, as if from heat, though no external damage was visible. His autopsy was inconclusive. One officer on the scene whispered that his eyes had turned entirely black. No one else confirmed this. The internet, as always, took the story and twisted it. Conspiracy forums erupted with theories that LaToya had been part of a larger experiment, either by secret government agencies or by supernatural forces. Some claimed the tapes were not recordings, but rituals themselves, designed to capture the soul of whoever watched them. A few online cults began circulating what they called the final frame, a still from the last tape, allegedly showing LaToya's face warped into something inhuman. Experts dismissed it as digital manipulation, but one psychologist who reviewed it reportedly quit her practice shortly after, citing irreversible cognitive corruption. A Reddit AMA with her the following month only lasted 12 minutes before she typed a final message and went silent. "You don't understand. She's not dead. She's inverted." For the remaining members of the Bernal congregation, there was no peace. Most were arrested on charges ranging from child endangerment to obstruction of justice. Several died in custody, one from suicide, one from a mysterious illness that caused rapid organ failure, and one who simply vanished during a prison transfer, prompting a massive internal investigation that yielded no results. The few who remained free fled the country, but they weren't safe either. In Brazil, one of them was found torn apart in his hotel room, the walls covered in a language no linguist could translate. A journal found in the room had only one legible sentence in English. "It's a circle, not a cross." Then came the lawsuits. Families of other children who had attended Bernal's church began coming forward, some admitting that their kids had returned home changed, silent, withdrawn. Others had gone missing but were never linked to the Bernal property until now. New investigations were launched, but most went nowhere. The paper trail was gone, the digital records erased. The only constant was a pattern. The further you looked into the story, the harder it became to look away. It was like staring into an abyss that stared back not with malice, but with understanding, as if it knew what frightened you most, and whispered it back in your own voice. And what of LaToya? No one knows. The last verified footage of her was that final tape. After that, no trace, no body, no bones, no DNA, nothing. Some believe she escaped. Others believe she was taken by something Bernal had summoned or awakened beneath that church. Theories range from portals to other dimensions to ancient beings imprisoned in the soil. A few researchers pointed to Native American legends about the child in the ground, a spirit that could mimic innocence and lure entire tribes to their doom. Whether or not Bernal had discovered some real mythology or simply gone mad was irrelevant now. The damage was done, but there's one final detail, a footnote most people ignore or perhaps are too afraid to acknowledge. During the fire that destroyed the Bernal chapel, one firefighter reported something strange. As he was clearing debris near the basement entrance, he claimed to hear a soft voice, humming a lullaby. He followed the sound, thinking it was a survivor. But as he approached the chamber, the floor gave way. He barely escaped with his life. The odd part? The song. He swore it was the same lullaby his mother used to sing to him. The firefighter was from Kansas. He'd never been to Black Hollow before in his life. When asked to hum the tune for his report, he began then froze mid-note, eyes wide. "That's not how it ends," he whispered, before collapsing into a panic attack. He later left the force. His name has been redacted in all public reports. Even now, the case of LaToya haunts not just the records of law enforcement, but the dreams of those who dig too deep. It's become a modern myth, a warning disguised as history. People speak of it in hushed tones, like an urban legend that might become real if said aloud too many times. But somewhere beyond our reach, perhaps beyond this dimension, there is still a girl with glassy eyes and a voice that hums lullabies to the lost. A girl whose last words weren't a scream or a plea, but a truth too twisted to forget. He isn't the devil. He's the gate. The gate. No one quite remembers when the dreams began. They weren't nightmares, exactly just flickers, shadows in the periphery of sleep, a presence watching from just beyond the edge of thought. LaToya told no one at first. Who could she tell? She wasn't a child. She was a grown woman, a mother, a believer. But belief is fragile when the very thing you believe in starts whispering back. It started subtly scratches on the inside of the windows, even though the frost was thick and untouched. The mirror would fog not only from breath, but from breath that didn't belong to her. At night, she'd wake to the scent of candle wax, even though her house was strictly electric. Then came the sighs. A long, aching sigh like someone disappointed. Just outside the room. She would rise quickly and check on her children. They slept soundly, their bodies twisted in innocent spirals. But the sigh would echo again, this time closer. She tried to dismiss it, tried to pray through it. The pastor came and sprinkled oil on the walls, leaving crosses of protection with his thumb. But the presence, if anything, seemed amused by the gesture, as if centuries of something darker had taken root here, long before holy oil and whispered psalms had arrived. One night, LaToya locked her bedroom door, not to keep something out, but to keep herself in, because she had started sleepwalking. She woke once standing over her youngest child, not moving, not blinking, just staring. She didn't remember walking there. She didn't remember dreaming, but her feet were ice cold, covered in mud. And the backyard was undisturbed. Then, as quickly as the disturbances began, they escalated. Her eldest son, once shy and mild, began speaking in tongues, but not the heavenly kind heard in Sunday service. His words were guttural, foreign, ancient. The sound of dead languages exhumed. One night he screamed, "He lives beneath the floor," over and over again until his voice cracked and his lips bled. They tried to hold him down, but he was strong. Unnaturally strong. The neighbors heard and called the police. But when the authorities came, he was calm, polite, and smiling. Reports started to pile up. The family doctor noticed strange marks around the children's wrists and ankles, abrasions, consistent with restraint. The school counselor described drawings from LaToya's daughter that included horned figures and circles of fire. One drawing showed the family floating in midair, mouths wide open, eyes black. LaToya was called in, asked to explain. But what could she say? That her home had become an altar for something ancient and terrible? That her dreams were not hers? That her children were no longer only her children? She left the school in silence. One night, her mother witnessed it firsthand. The grandmother, once skeptical, had stayed overnight to comfort LaToya, hoping prayer would be enough. But nothing prepared her for what she saw. In the living room, around 3 a.m., the youngest child began to levitate. Not a trick, not a hoax, he rose slowly from the floor, his limbs limp, his head tilted unnaturally backward. He floated 5 feet into the air before slamming to the ground with a thud that shook the glassware. The grandmother screamed and ran outside, refusing to come back inside until daylight. That moment would be what finally turned rumor into record. Word spread quickly. Social services stepped in. The children were temporarily removed. Psychologists came. Police returned. And then, the Indiana Department of Child Services issued a chilling report. It stated that something unexplainable was happening. One worker claimed to see one of the boys walk backward up a wall. Not climb, walk. Another claimed that lights flickered only in rooms where questioning occurred. One officer refused to re-enter the house after his equipment failed, his belt inexplicably unclipping itself, and a growl issued from an otherwise silent room. At this point, the church officially intervened. Father Magina, a seasoned priest with no interest in media, agreed to investigate. What he found turned a haunting into a documented case of possession recognized by the diocese. He described cold spots, objects thrown across rooms, and the unmistakable stench of sulfur, a smell often cited in accounts of demonic activity. He performed a minor exorcism and claimed to be attacked afterward in his dreams. It was no longer just about Latoya. The house had become a portal. Investigators tried to dismiss it. They searched for mold, carbon monoxide, anything that could cause hallucinations. But nothing explained the scratches, the levitations, the voices. Latoya's physical health began to decline. She lost weight, became withdrawn, often staring at walls for hours. Her children drew darker images, doors in the ground, hands coming. Through mirrors, their mother with eyes stitched shut. Every counselor assigned to them requested reassignment within a month. One even admitted he started hearing whispers in his sleep, whispers that called him by name. Eventually, the case reached the desk of a state contractor, someone outside the realm of the church or police. He was a skeptic by trade, hired to debunk, but what he documented did the opposite. He took hundreds of photos. One showed a figure standing in the window when no one was home. Another caught a shadowy shape in the hallway with no visible source. He reported electrical devices dying within minutes of being inside. He even suffered a mysterious illness days after visiting and refused to ever return. Latoya herself agreed to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. The results were inconclusive. No signs of delusion, no history of schizophrenia or hallucinations. Just trauma, deep trauma. When asked about the trauma, she whispered a single sentence. Something in that house wanted to wear me like skin. It was a phrase no one could quite forget. Not even the doctor. That line would later appear in one of the daughter's drawings, a black silhouette stretching its arms wide, like pulling on a coat. The caption, written in shaky handwriting, said, "I fit now." The Department of Child Services could not explain the phenomena, but eventually returned the children. Latoya moved out. The house was exorcised multiple times, blessed, purified, but it was never quite clean. Paranormal researchers began visiting. TV crews tried to buy rights. The new owner, unaware of the past, reported a lingering sense of being watched. Eventually, the house was abandoned, then demolished. Its remains buried. But concrete cannot erase history. Even after all of that, the story wouldn't die. A book was written. A film option discussed. But deeper than headlines or interviews was a whisper that something had followed them. Latoya and her family reported continued dreams, flickers of shadows, voices in empty rooms. She moved cities, changed her name. But still, on the anniversary of the first levitation, her daughter would wake screaming, convinced she was being pulled through the floor. That something beneath still remembered. Father Magina, long retired, rarely speaks of the case now. But in a rare interview, he said something that sent a chill down every listener's spine. There are houses that hold memories, and then there are houses that hunger. This one was the latter. His words were echoed by others, those who dared spend a night in what locals now called the demon house. Some left with scratches, others with silence. One visitor never spoke again after their stay. So what was it? A mass hallucination? A family unraveling from the inside? Or a doorway that should never have been opened? Those who know the story still argue. Psychologists, priests, scientists. But one thing no one can deny is this: when reality fractures, when the rules of physics and psychology no longer apply, something else slips through. Something that doesn't need belief. Just invitation, and once it enters, it doesn't knock. It settles in. It waits.